The rain was coming down in absolute sheets. Tushar's lungs burned as he sprinted through the flooded, pitch-black streets, desperately chasing the taillights of the absolute last transit of the night. If he missed this, he was walking home in a thunderstorm. He lunged onto the top step just as the doors violently hissed open. Stepping inside felt like crossing into a sanctuary. The deafening roar of thunder and the biting wind were instantly muted, replaced by the steady, quiet hum of the engine. The aisles were completely bare. A long, grueling day at the office had drained whatever energy he had left. The quiet isolation of the empty cabin gave him an immediate, heavy sense of security. He slumped into a back corner seat, leaned his head against the cool glass of the window, and let the rhythmic thud of the tires pull him straight into a deep sleep, unaware that the quiet is starting to feel a little too heavy. Exactly 2 minutes later, Tushar jolted awake. The quiet isolation of the empty cabin was completely gone, replaced by a suffocating claustrophobic heat. The bus was packed shoulder to shoulder. Every single seat was taken, and dozens of people were crammed into the aisles. The engine maintained a steady hum. The brakes hadn't engaged. The bus made absolutely 0 stops. He convinced himself it was a fever dream, a hallucination brought on by sheer exhaustion. He shut his eyes tight. Minutes later, his eyes fluttered open a second time. The stifling body heat was gone. The aisles were clear. The bus was once again perfectly empty. He drifts back into the dark, choosing the safety of sleep over the impossible sight he just witnessed. The bus keeps moving, but the familiar route home is starting to feel like a one-way trip into something else entirely. The silence of the empty cabin didn't last long. A sharp, distinct scent cut through the stale air. Thick, gray clouds of smoke began drifting across the aisle, the unmistakable, pungent smell of a lit bitty cigarette burning in a closed space. Tushar turned his head. Sitting in the seat directly beside him was an old man. His skin was mapped with deep wrinkles, but his eyes were piercing. They glowed with an unnatural sharpness, cutting straight through the dark interior. He claimed he had ridden this exact route every single night for 30 years, and he knew a simple fact. No living, breathing human dares to board this specific bus after midnight. He then recounted his own terrifying mistake from exactly 1 year prior. He was sitting in this exact spot when he noticed a passenger across the aisle, a man sitting impossibly still, whose skin lacked any color or signs of life. The passenger simply stared at the old man without blinking. The story reached a sudden, violent peak. The old man described how the lifeless figure slowly raised a stiff finger, pointed directly at his chest, and whispered a single phrase, "You do not belong here." Tushar let out a nervous laugh, brushing the story off as the rambling of a local eccentric. He rubbed his eyes to clear the lingering smoke, but when he opened them, the seat beside him was empty. No old man, no smoke, no trace that anyone had ever been there. The smoke was still hanging in the air, but the man was gone. No footsteps, no opening doors, just a sudden, hollow silence where a voice had been seconds ago. Tushar was alone, but the seat next to him still felt occupied. Desperate for an anchor, Tushar looked toward the front of the cabin. A few rows up, a lone man sat perfectly upright, quietly reading a broadsheet newspaper in the dead of the night. Claustrophobia began to set in. Tushar called out to him, his voice trembling, but the man didn't flinch. Outside, the storm was raging, sending aggressive flashes of lightning through the rain-streaked windows, casting harsh, moving shadows across the empty rows. Finally, the man lowered the newspaper. Where his face should have been, there was only a violently mangled, bloody skull. One side of his head was entirely crushed inward, and deep, hollow sockets stared back where his eyes used to be. Pure, unfiltered panic took over. Tushar let out a guttural scream, slamming his back against the window and violently squeezing his eyes shut. When he forced his eyes open a second later, the nightmare was gone. The man sitting there looked entirely normal. His face was intact, he wore a polite smile, and he calmly extended a cold bottle of water toward Tushar. The smiling man leaned in close. His voice was steady, but his warning was severe. He told Tushar that strange things happen on this route in the dark, and that he needed to get off immediately before he never finished the sentence. Tushar broke eye contact for just a split second to splash the cold water onto his sweating face. When he looked back up, the seat was empty. Man, the blood, the warning, they all vanished as quickly as they appeared. For the first time tonight, Tushar couldn't blame his eyes or his tired brain. Something was wrong with the bus itself. Tushar looked toward the front. The seemingly normal man was standing by the open folding doors as the bus hurtled down the wet asphalt. Before Tushar can respond, the man walks to the open doors of the speeding bus and throws himself into the night. The moment the bus slowed for an upcoming stop, he scrambled down the aisle and hurled his own body out onto the concrete. He hit the pavement hard, soaked to the bone, gasping for cold air in the rain. He lay there watching the taillights, but as the bus slowly pulled away under the streetlights, its physical form began to shift. The yellow paint and intact windows dissolved. In its place rolled a massive, charred, rusted metal husk. It was a completely burnt-out wreck from a decades-old disaster, driving silently on exposed rims. Through the skeletal metal frame, Tushar saw the passengers. The massive crowd was back. They were all scorched and frozen in pain. Among them, the old man with the beady and the man with the crushed skull. Every single dead, burned soul in that wreckage had their head turned, staring back at him with haunting, unnatural smiles. The mundane vehicles we step onto every single day sometimes carry the heavy, trapped echoes of past tragedies. They drive the same routes, picking up whoever happens to be standing at the stop.